David R. Guttery is the president of inSource Financial Advisors in Lincoln, Nebraska. David Guttery and Seth Edgell are financial advisors who represent Emeritus Investment Company, LLC, and Emeritus Advisory Services. Please stay tuned through the end of this video for additional important disclosure information.
Hello everyone, I'm joined today by David Guttery, President of inSource Financial Advisors in Lincoln, Nebraska, to share his thoughts about changing economic seasons. David, thanks so much for being with us today. With our last interview, you explained your reasons for being optimistic as we began the new year. But today I understand that you're going to continue that discussion as it pertains to changing economic seasons, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Within several videos over the previous years, I've drawn reference to an image of the economic cycle. Now, I saw this for the first time when I was in school 37 years ago, and throughout the duration of my career, I can't remember a time when this hasn't been a valuable tool for portfolio construction. I've encouraged clients to think of this cycle in terms of seasons. Starting at the left of the chart, we emerge into economic spring, and then into economic summer, fall, winter, and then ultimately back into economic spring at the far right of the graphic. I suggest that clients consider how their behavior is incentivized by how they feel. When it's cold outside, as it is now, you're more likely to wear jeans and jackets and find yourself spending more time indoors, and probably in front of a fire. During periods of economic summer, when it's 98 degrees outside, you're probably not wearing jeans and jackets. At such times, you're incentivized to wear short-sleeve shirts and shorts, and rather than being in front of the fire, you're most likely at the beach or on the lake. Likewise, economic cycles or seasons will incentivize your consumption behavior as well. During periods of economic winter, you're more likely to focus on things that you need, including food, pharmaceuticals, health care, utilities, and other durable kinds of staple items. However, during economic summer, when discretionary income is plentiful, you will likely consume greater amounts of products and services that you don't necessarily need but want. We can get a sense of where we are in the economic cycle by observing levels of consumer confidence and other metrics that give us a gauge as to the attitudes of consumers. This is important because consumption is 70% of GDP. If you feel poor, then patterns of consumption will likely reflect that sentiment. Returning to the analogy, that economic groundhog has seen his shadow for the last 4 years. This has been an extended El Nino period of economic winter, and we have adjusted our portfolios tactically. But now, I sense that attitudes are changing, and the temperature is feeling warmer. So I do believe that we are emerging into economic spring at this point.
Well, David, that sounds like great news. That's also in line with the thoughts that you shared previously at the beginning of the year. You've often talked about sentiment and how that can influence asset prices. Well, throughout the previous year, you described this as being palpable and pervasively negative. In your opinion, is this beginning to wane?
In my opinion, indeed, that seems to be the case. To demonstrate this point, let me offer some insight into myself that might also resonate with many of your viewers. Although I have never been diagnosed with light deprivation syndrome, I can tell you that in the winter months, when there is increasingly less daylight, I can become somewhat cranky. It becomes even worse when that is accompanied by weeks of overcast and gloomy gray skies. At some point, however, we get a break in the clouds. Imagine how much better you feel when you look up and you finally see the sun peeking through the clouds with that beautiful blue sky in the background. It may still be 30 degrees outside, but the return of sunshine can quickly change the way that you feel after several days of gloomy, overcast skies. Right now, it is my belief that 2024 could bring a welcome relief from 4 years of overcast skies and a positive repricing of risk. In my opinion, this market is worried about many things that have just not come to fruition, or may have come to fruition in a much more docile manner than previously feared. For example, the average consumer may not fully appreciate this yet, but the data over the last 15 months indicates that inflation has been declining at a faster rate than the degree by which our incomes were rising at a declining rate. In other words, our capacity to consume has been consistently less negative for every month for almost a year and a half. From the perspective of financial physics, if inflationary pressures have been abating consistently over time, then at some point, I would expect to see a corresponding improvement in the sentiment of the average consumer. So again, back to the sunlight after a long period of overcast skies analogy, this is important because if you're feeling better about your economic disposition, then at some point, that will translate into improving patterns of consumption and thus better than expected earnings and revenues from companies that manufacture the items being purchased in greater quantities. So tracking consumer sentiment is tactically important. Indeed, since November of 2022, according to the University of Michigan and their Consumer Confidence Survey, we have observed confidence rising gradually. Now, for reference, the reading observed in November of 2022 was a historical low point for the index. Since the inception of the metric, the average consumer had never felt more dour about their ability to consume. So while we have improved tremendously since then, we've still got a long way to go. But from a tactical management perspective, it is the observation of data such as this that leads us to believe that now would be an opportune time to gradually begin shifting the focus of our portfolios away from being heavily defensive to incorporating a greater degree of growth assets that typically prosper during periods of economic summer.
Well, as a consumer, I can attest that the impact of inflation still feels very heavy. But that's encouraging to see that relief may be increasingly evident this year. So David, from a tactical perspective, when you are managing portfolios, how do you encourage clients to be patient and make such periods of distress work for their benefit?
Well, as Rudyard Kipling wrote in his poem, If, my clients are depending on me to keep my head about me when all those around me are losing theirs. Said another way, my clients are depending on me to be this guy. I serve my clients in a number of ways. In this case, I must be that stoic jet fighter pilot on vacation as we ride yet another scary roller coaster. Across the 33 years of my career, I've ridden many of these things, and I know where the gift shop is located. I know how this ride ends. Rather than being persuaded by pervasively negative and palpable sentiment, I must be stoically disciplined as I help clients wade through the fog of that sentiment to determine if there's anything rational supporting it. If not, then such periods of time can create opportunities. As Warren Buffett said, be greedy when others are fearful. Well, it's impossible to be greedy when others are fearful if you're running with a herd of lemmings. Significant periods of disruption that are long in both frequency and duration can foster panic-driven herd of lemmings mentality. I have to be able to discern fact from fiction and help clients manage volatility to the greatest degree possible and to take advantage of opportunities when available through dispassionate and tactical management of their accounts. So we accomplish this with proactive and frequent communication and with an intentional deep dive on a quarterly basis into the mechanics of their portfolio as we gauge performance against the assumptions made within the governing plan. By doing this, we return the focus to the objectives that we're trying to accomplish as a function of planning goals.
Well, David, I have to say that I love your analogies. That really helps to make these critical points of planning clear and easily understandable. So last question, if we are emerging into economic spring, then what insight do you have with regard to asset prices that may be undervalued? When do you think we can expect market valuations to return to normal as we emerge from one season to the next?
Well, that is indeed the million-dollar question. And yes, I have an analogy with which to demonstrate my thoughts. I have encouraged clients to think of a given stock as being a ball floating on the water. The water is the economic environment that supports the company within its sector. If left to its own devices, the ball will rise as the water rises, and the economic environment becomes more favorable for that company and its sector. Conversely, the ball will fall if the water level decreases. Then along comes the metaphorical hand that artificially holds the ball under the water. This hand can take the shape of irrational fears, shocks to the economic system, a Federal Reserve that is more aggressive than anticipated, fears over another round of potential bank failures, geopolitical events, and other things. The ball is under the water. It shouldn't be, but it is. This is when I channel my inner jet fighter pilot on vacation to determine whether or not that hand is rational. Can I translate that to a quantifiable figure on a spreadsheet? If not, then the question becomes, when does that hand release the ball? When does sentiment dissipate? I can't answer that question, but I believe that point of inflection remains in our future. What I do know is that when the hand releases the ball, it won't remain underwater. It's financial physics. It will return to the surface where the economic environment supports its valuation. In the past, I have referred to this phenomenon as the uncoiling of a tightly wound spring. We are beginning to see that at the present time. So in summary, I do believe that we can quantify changing of seasons. We can observe attitudes toward consumption that are improving. That seems to be translating into increasingly better patterns of consumption. The Federal Reserve has taken no action in 5 of the last 6 meetings. Bond yields may have peaked as a result. A stochastic analysis of market data suggests that Bollinger Bands are being redrawn. The yield curve inversion that was once 108 basis points stood at only 20 basis points as of the end of the year. In my opinion, if these trends continue throughout the current year, then it is possible that we could see many of these submerged balls return to the surface. My job is to do what I can to tactically, proactively, and dispassionately allocate client accounts so they might benefit from these potential changing economic seasons.
Well, David, as always, thanks so much for that information. And for additional information, David may be reached through the means listed upon the following screen. For inSource Financial Advisors, I'm Brannon Dawkins.
David Guttery and Seth Edgell independently offer securities and investment advisory services through Emeritas Investment Company, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, and Emeritas Advisory Services. Information provided in today's segments is gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed and should not be interpreted as tax or legal advice. Any performance stated is past performance and is not indicative of future results.